Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Be sure to join us on Facebook at facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. Facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. A professor of classics and humanities at California State University at Fresno, Bruce Thornton is a fellow at the Hoover Institution. His latest book, The Wages of Appeasement, Ancient Athens, Munich, and Obama's America. Bruce, welcome to Uncommon Knowledge.
Thanks, Peter.
Quick opening question. Let me quote to you from your book, from The Wages of Appeasement. Quote, appeasement is an eternal temptation for all peoples. Why?
Well, because human nature is constant. I think the really conservative assumption of this book, which I derive from Thucydides, is that whatever external progress that people might make in technology, there still remains a certain core human nature that can be counted on to generate consistent behaviors over time. Of course, there's always differences looking over such a span. But, for example, fear, one of Thucydides' causes of conflict, is an obvious constant in human nature. And so you can use historical examples if you account for the obvious differences.
All right.
And see how illuminating they might be for your own predicament.
All right. Segment 1 then, appeasing King Philip. Philip II of Macedonia, we now get into the time machine and travel back to the 4th century BC. Philip II of Macedonia, in what we would today think of as northern Greece, and in the 4th century BC is feudal, backwards, barbaric, by comparison with the city-states further south, Athens, Sparta, the other city-states. And Philip, the backward feudal king, conquers these developed city-states all the same. How come?
Well, the city-states of ancient Greece are constitutional governments. That's their great invention. That's their gift to us, is the idea of a constitutional government. But they have drawbacks. Particularly the radical democracy of Athens has drawbacks. One of the major ones, and then this is consistent all the way to our time, is that each city-state had a hard time combining with other city-states to meet a common threat. The Persian invasions of 480, they did manage to do that, but we forget that there were a lot of city-states that didn't join the coalition. They were parochial, in
just
other words.
Roughly a century earlier, 5th century BC, is the golden age, Pericles. They combined, they beat back the Persians. So within, say, 3 generations or so, almost within living memory, they had this great triumph to which they were able to look back, but they still weren't able to put it together again.
Right. And it's because the idea of self-rule, of citizen autonomy, was for Athens or for Sparta or for Thebes. At some occasions, they could compare their own free constitutions against an autocrat like the great king of Persia, for example. But Athens had no problem enslaving other Greeks because ultimately freedom was for Athenians. So to make coalitions, to meet a common threat was very difficult for them.
But let me quote to you again from The Wages of Appeasement. The city-states of ancient Greece, which had invented the idea of political freedom, would never be free again. The causes will be found in the destructive pursuit of self-interest. But there's a paradox there, I think, because really, correctly calculated, self-interest would have led them to coalesce, to unite against Philip. So it was, in a certain sense, it wasn't the destructive pursuit of self-interest, it was the destructive pursuit of a miscalculated...
Well, I call it short-term interest.
Short-term.
And that's partly also a reflection of the factional nature of particularly Athenian democracy. And that's one of the banes, as we see today, of any democracy. You have 2 sorts of interest at play. You have the interest of a city-state like Athens vis-a-vis the other city-states that it sees as competitors and rivals and ancient enemies, such as between Thebes and Athens. But within a city-state, particularly one like Athens, in which citizen participation is very broad, you have various kinds of factions vying with each other for preeminence within the state. And so it may be in the short-term interest of a faction to appease an aggressor, or even to ally with aggressor, to look, as many did to Philip, for support, financial or otherwise, for their faction. Same with states. States have short-term interests that sometimes blind them to longer-term interests.
You make a second point in the section on Philip and the city-states. Again, I'm quoting the Wages of Appeasement. Quote, "The most important factor was the decay of civic virtue. To be free, citizens have to have the character worthy of freedom."
Exactly. And that's the consistent theme throughout all three historical examples down to today.
Describe character that's worthy of freedom.
Well, you have to have certain kinds of virtues, political virtues. This involves putting the interests of the collective destiny of the state ahead of one's own interests, having an affection and a bond. Pericles, in his famous funeral oration, calls it love, an eros for the state. You have to feel pride in it. You have to want to hand it on to your descendants. You have to think that it's better than the alternative, not just different, but better than it.